The ribs were messy, sweet, and perfect. I had sauce on my knuckles and corn stuck between my teeth. And honestly, I didn't care. The lake breeze barely cut the heat, and the air smelled like charcoal and bug spray. I was sitting at the picnic table in my cutoff shorts and an old Rutgers t-shirt, letting the sweat run down my back while my nephews shouted over a cornhole match on the grass. Then Dad cleared his throat. Not the casual kind, the kind that meant he wanted attention. Real attention. I looked up just as Ryan and Mark went quiet across the table. Their wives, Stacy and Carly, perked up like they'd heard a bell. Even the kids froze mid-throw. Dad was standing, paper plate still in hand, baked beans sliding to the corner. "I've got something to say. It's serious." No one moved. He nodded once, like this had been rehearsed. "I finalized my will last week." My ribs suddenly tasted like ash. Ryan set his drink down slow. Mark leaned back, arms crossed. Mom stepped beside Dad, smoothing her apron like she couldn't wait for him to finish. "We decided the farm should go to Ryan and Mark," Dad said. "The equipment, the land, the accounts. Makes sense since they're the ones with real heads for business." Carly let out a breath through her nose. Stacy smiled, tight and satisfied. I just nodded and kept eating, biting into the cob like it was the only thing grounding me. Mom chimed in, cheerful and clueless. "Jenna's got that little graphic design job, but this kind of thing, it's not really your world, honey." I didn't answer. What was there to say? The table shifted. Ryan leaned forward like he might speak, but didn't. Mark tapped his fork against his plate. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Like everyone already knew the playbook, and I wasn't part of the team. Quick note, before we go further, share which city or country you're watching from. The kids went back to their game, whooping like nothing had happened. The wives started clearing plates. I wiped my hands on a napkin, feeling the weight settle in my chest. Not rage, just that familiar sting of being sidelined. Again, and then Mom said it, real casual. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We made sure to set a little something aside for you too." I swallowed my last bite and looked out toward the water. Dad clapped Ryan on the back and started talking soy futures. I stood up, grabbed my plate, and walked toward the trash can. My corn hit the bottom with a hollow thud. I was halfway to the trash can when Ryan spoke up behind me. "Look, it's not like this came out of nowhere," he said, following. "You know how much time I put into grain contracts and sales meetings. Dad's just being practical." I dropped my plate in the bin and turned. "Sure, practical." Mark joined in, arms folded. "I've been managing the labor crews since I was 20. We've been making real business decisions for years now." "You think I don't make business decisions?" I asked. Carly cut in before either of them could answer. She had that voice she used when she talked to teachers or customer service. Just a little too loud, overly polite. "Jenna, come on. Nobody's saying you're not smart, but this is farming. It's physical, all day, long hours. Not really for someone who works on a computer." I raised an eyebrow. "You think I sit around drawing pictures?" "Well, you are creative," she said. Like that explained everything. Mom stepped between us with a pitcher of lemonade. "That's why we talked it over and decided to set a little bit aside for you. You'll still be comfortable, sweetie." "How much is a little bit?" She glanced at Dad, who nodded like it was generous. "About 40,000. We put it in a CD, low risk." "Nice," I said. "Thanks." I wasn't going to give them a show. They wanted a reaction, and I wasn't handing it over. Stacy sipped her drink, looking me up and down like she was appraising a clearance rack. "Maybe this will be the push you need to buy a real house. You could settle somewhere, meet someone. Might be time to get serious." I smiled without meaning it. "Right, because owning a house equals success." "Don't get defensive," she said, laughing lightly. "We just want the best for you." The kids drifted back to their chairs, noses buried in their phones. I sat down again at the end of the table, legs sticking to the bench. My tote bag buzzed against my thigh. Once, twice, then again. "Probably Tessa." I ignored it. Ryan leaned back, stretching. "Anyway, I've got a meeting with that guy from Kressler Dairy next week. If he's ready to sell, we'll scoop up that acreage fast." Mark nodded. "And I've been talking to that equipment supplier in St. Cloud. We need updated harvesters if we're going to keep up with volume next year." Dad joined the table again, his beer sloshing a little as he sat. "That's what I'm proud of. You boys are always thinking ahead. That's how this family's going to stay on top." I stared at the condensation sliding down my glass. The tote buzzed again. Stacy leaned in, squinting. Is that your phone? It's been going off for a while. It's just work, I said, not looking. On a holiday? Carly asked, laughing. Wow, someone's got to set boundaries. I didn't answer. I just reached down, flipped the bag closed tighter, and looked out at the lake. Dad slapped Ryan on the back. Let's keep this thing growing. We've got momentum now. Mom nodded. All we want is for everyone to find their place. I didn't say it out loud, but I already had. Tyler was half sprawled on a lawn chair near the edge of the deck, thumbing through his phone like always. One of the dogs had passed out next to him, panting in the heat. The rest of the family kept buzzing about acreage and updated combines like we were all shareholders instead of blood. Then Tyler froze. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. His thumb stopped mid-scroll, and he squinted at the screen like he didn't trust what he saw. Guys, he said, is your name in Inkwell magazine, Jenna? The table went silent. Ryan stopped mid-sentence. Stacy raised an eyebrow. Dad let out a chuckle. There's probably 1,000 Jenna Millers in the country. Don't get too excited. Tyler didn't look up. No, it says Jenna Miller, 32, CEO of Greenbite Systems, based in-state, lives in East Bridge. His voice cracked at the end, like he wasn't sure if he was in trouble or impressed. Mark leaned toward him, frowning. Let me see that. Tyler didn't hand it over. He just kept reading. She's in the top 50 under 35 list. There's a photo. She's standing next to the governor at some energy summit. Now all eyes were on me. I reached across the table, grabbed a square of cornbread, and took a bite. I guess that article finally went live, I said, chewing. Ryan blinked. Wait, what? Mark looked between me and Tyler, not even pretending to hide the confusion. You're in Inquiry's magazine? What the hell is Greenbite? Carly made a face like she smelled something sour. Is this a joke? Tyler turned the phone around and held it up for everyone to see. It's her. Like, her. Mom stepped closer, squinting. That's Jenna? Sure is, I said, picking crumbs off my shirt. Dad leaned forward and grabbed Tyler's phone. He squinted, held it farther from his face, then let out a short breath through his nose. Well, I'll be damned. Ryan took the phone next. Is this real? I shrugged. I didn't Photoshop it, if that's what you're asking. Stacy gave me a weird little half smile. When was this taken? 2 months ago. Clean Energy Summit in Albany. You're a CEO? Mark asked, voice flat. Yeah, Greenbite's mine. Nobody said a thing for a full 10 seconds. All you could hear was the slap of beanbags hitting the cornhole boards across the yard. Finally, Mom cleared her throat. But, you said you were doing design work? I said I worked in design. That was true, back in the early days. Jesus, Ryan muttered, still staring at the screen. You never told us. You never asked, Carly snorted. You live in Eastbridge? I've been to Eastbridge. You're telling me you built a tech company in a 2-bedroom rental with no garage? Technically, it was 1 bedroom. The prototype was on my kitchen table. Tyler looked up, stunned. That's so badass, I smirked. Thanks. Dad leaned back slowly in his chair, handing the phone to Mom. I mean, it's impressive, but still, business magazines, flashy titles, they love to hype people up. It's not hype, Tyler said quickly. It says she's running a clean tech company that designs AI for ag logistics. It's right here. This stuff's legit. AI for what? Ryan asked. Farm logistics, I said, wiping my fingers on a napkin. Efficiency mapping, load balancing, predictive yield. Stuff you guys deal with every season, Mark scoffed. That's some startup fluff. Sounds expensive. I mean, yeah, I said. It is, but it works. Before he could come back with something smart, Stacy grabbed her phone and started typing fast. A second later, her eyes got big. Oh my God, she said. This says Greenbite just raised their Series D. You're valued at, hold on, over $2 billion? And you just partnered with 3 major agricore? That sounds about right. What companies? Ryan asked, leaning in. Senvita, Gold Sprout, and Arrow North. Ryan's jaw twitched. Stacy kept scrolling. Wait, Prairie Logistics? That's your delivery partner, right? She said, glancing at Ryan and Mark. That's ours. Yeah, Ryan said slowly. Why? I popped the last bite of cornbread into my mouth and stood up to brush off my shorts. Greenbite bought them out last month. Ryan lunged for Stacy's phone before I'd even finished brushing the crumbs off my hands. He scrolled fast like he was trying to find the part where it turned into a prank. Jesus, he muttered. It says you designed the first AI model yourself. I did, I said. Took about 9 months. Carly stood there, pale, one hand on her stomach like she might be sick. Hold on, you funded the company? On your own? Yeah, I had savings. Freelance paid well back then. I lived cheap. Did all the dev work myself the first year. Mark laughed, loud and fake. Come on, that's some Silicon Valley puff piece. You expect us to believe you built some billion-dollar tech empire in your kitchen while we thought you were selling Etsy logos? Believe whatever you want, I said. It still happened. Stacy was still glued to her phone. No, it's not a puff piece, Mark. There's a second article on Forbes. Valuation confirmed. 2.2 billion. Series D round closed 2 weeks ago. Mom sat down slowly next to Dad, hands clasped in her lap. She didn't say a word. Ryan kept reading, eyes darting back and forth. This says Greenbite runs predictive models for harvest timing, transport routing, supply chain tracking. You've got government contracts? What the hell? And we own Prairie Logistics now, Stacy added, staring at the screen. Jenna, you own their delivery partner. I nodded. That's right. The acquisition finalized last month. Ryan looked up at me. You signed off on that? Personally. Carly blinked like she was trying to reset her vision. Why wouldn't you say something? You never asked. Dad cleared his throat, sharp and low. You knew Prairie handled our freight. You knew that. I did, I said. It came up in the acquisition paperwork. And you didn't tell us? He snapped. Wasn't really relevant to the will discussion, I said. Mark stood up fast, his chair scraping the patio. This is insane. This can't be real. It's real, Tyler said from his seat, still staring at his phone. They're calling Greenbite the backbone of AgTech 3.0. Jenna's on a panel next month with the Secretary of Agriculture. Stacy glanced over at him. Where did you find that? TechCrunch article. It's all over the place now. Carly turned toward me, eyes sharp. You made us feel bad about money for years. All that modest living, your old car, that tiny apartment. And meanwhile, you're sitting on what, millions? I never talked about money. That was you. You let us believe you were scraping by. No, I said, flat. You assumed that. I never once complained about rent or asked for help. Dad let out a low whistle, shaking his head. I'll be damned. Ryan still had the phone. This article says you're launching a regional research center? Yeah, agricultural innovation and training. Pilot programs start next year. Where? He asked. Right here, outside of Eastbridge, about 12 miles from your south field. Everyone went dead quiet. Tyler looked up. Tyler, you're doing all this near us? Figured it made sense. I know the area, know the people. Mom's voice was barely audible. How long have you been building this? I didn't hesitate. Almost 8 years. She nodded slowly, like her brain needed a minute to catch up. And no one knew. Didn't think you'd be interested. Ryan's hands dropped to the table. You think we wouldn't care if our sister was running a billion-dollar company? You cared when you thought I made flyers and logos. That was enough to dismiss me. Carly's face tightened. We weren't dismissing you. We were just trying to include you. No, I said. You were trying to fit me into something that made sense to you. Mom finally spoke up. All this time, we had no idea. No, I said, picking up my glass. You didn't. Dad's voice snapped across the table before I could take a sip. So you did hide this. I set the glass down. No, I didn't. Bull, he said. You let us think you were barely scraping by. All those times we offered to help. I didn't ask for help. I said no every single time. Mom's eyes were glassy, her lips pressed into a tight line. Why wouldn't you tell us? Tell you what? That I was working my ass off building something no one cared to ask about? We just thought, she started, voice trailing off. Exactly, I said. You thought, you assumed. You never asked what I was actually doing. You made up your minds years ago. Ryan tried to cut the tension with a laugh, holding his hands up. Well, damn, guess we misjudged you, huh? I didn't smile. Yeah, You did. His smirk dropped. Carly folded her arms, staring at me like I'd stolen something. You knew how tight things got with the drought last year, and here you were sitting on millions? I never talked about money, I said. I never rubbed anything in anyone's face. You're mad at an image you created? That's rich, she shot back. You're out here playing minimalist while we're budgeting groceries, and you've got what? Stock options? Private jets? I almost laughed. Carly, I drive a Ford Fusion, same one since graduate school. The only reason you didn't know is because you didn't think I could have anything worth knowing. Stacy stayed quiet now. Even Mark had shut up. Tyler's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Holy crap! This says Jenna personally donated $30 million to agricultural education. Ryan blinked. What? Tyler held up the phone. Says she's funding scholarships, grants, and building a research center focused on AI for small to mid-sized farms. That true? Dad asked. Every word, I said. We broke ground 2 weeks ago. Why here? Ryan asked. Because this is home, I said, even if it never felt like I belonged in it. Mom looked like she didn't recognize me. We never meant to shut you out. You didn't have to mean it, I said. You just had to keep treating me like a side project. Carly was still fuming. You made us feel guilty about everything. About vacations. About upgrading the truck. All while you were off being some tech queen behind our backs. I didn't make you feel anything, I snapped. You decided I was less. You chose to pity me. That's on you. No one argued with that. Tyler was still scrolling, still wide-eyed. She's on the cover of Fast Company next month. And there's a podcast episode, how Jenna Miller quietly took over AgTech. I looked across the table. Dad was staring at his hands. Mom was blinking like she was trying to wake up. Stacy just kept rubbing her arm like she was cold. They all looked at me like I'd walked out of a spaceship, like I was a stranger. You're really building that research center? Ryan asked. Already started. He nodded slowly. And you didn't say a word. I wanted to come home and just be Jenna, I said. Not a company, not a brand. Just your sister. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I leaned back in my chair and waited for someone to stop pretending they understood. Dad picked up Tyler's phone again, holding it closer this time, scrolling slower. No jokes, no smug tone. This says your company pledged $100 million over 5 years to support sustainable farming, he said, his voice low and steady. I nodded. That's the initiative we announced in April. $50 million in grants, the rest in tech, equipment, and R&D support. Mark snorted. But it wasn't the same as before. Less mockery, more disbelief. I'm reading this article here. It says Greenbite has controlling shares in 5 regional farms. One of them's what? 8 miles from our Westfield? Yeah, Old Winslow acreage. They're in our pilot program. Mom finally looked up. Her hands were still clasped tight in her lap, knuckles white. You've been doing all this here? Not everything, but enough. She shook her head. I don't understand how we missed this. You weren't looking. No one argued. Ryan leaned on the table, eyes narrowed like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't know existed until 10 minutes ago. So you're worth, what, hundreds of millions? That's what the board says. And you still live in that crappy apartment in Eastbridge? It's quiet, I said. Close to the trail. I like it. He stared at me. Your car doesn't even have a backup camera. It still runs. Mark leaned back, arms crossed. So you're just out here playing poor? I looked him dead in the eye. I don't play anything. My phone buzzed again in the tote next to me. This time I pulled it out. Tessa, UN docs ready for review. Let me know if you want to sign before midnight for East Coast timing. I replied with a thumbs up and a short, "Will review soon." Then I looked up and dropped it into the middle of the silence. By the way, we're finalizing a partnership with the UN. Clean water sustainability across 10 rural regions. Dad blinked. The United Nations? Yep. Stacy looked like she was about to say something, then just sat back and shook her head. Carly rubbed her temples. Mark wasn't even pretending to act unimpressed anymore. Ryan exhaled. You're serious. I always have been. You just weren't paying attention. Mom's voice came out flat. You've been in this house every summer, sitting at that same table, laughing with the kids. And you never mentioned a thing. I was never asked. We thought you were just doing graphic work, she said. You decided that. You put me in a box. Everyone did. It was easier than finding out what I actually built. Tyler spoke up again, still scrolling. You've been meeting with the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Energy. I've been on Capitol Hill 4 times this year. Why not move to DC or New York? Ryan asked, still sounding baffled. Because I like it here. I like the lake. I like the quiet. And because I didn't need to run away to do something big. Dad rubbed his jaw. I thought I had you figured out. You didn't. I thought you were struggling, that you didn't have direction. No, I said. You thought I wasn't doing something you understood. The whole table sat still, the weight of it finally settling in. For the first time in my life, they weren't talking over me. They weren't brushing me off or changing the subject. They were listening. Not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. Stacy finally spoke. I feel stupid. You're not stupid, I said. You just didn't think I was capable of being anything more than what you expected. Ryan stood and started pacing. You mean to tell me we've been depending on Prairie for 2 years, and now you own it? Yep. We're going to have to renegotiate our delivery contract this fall. Are you going to screw us on pricing? I raised my eyebrows. Do you think I would? He stopped walking. I don't know. Then maybe you should start. He didn't say anything else. Mom let out a breath, like she'd been holding it for years. You changed everything, she said. You changed the industry, and we didn't even know. I looked around at all of them, their stunned, confused, and finally quiet faces. Yeah, I said. I did. Dad ran a hand down his face, like the last 20 minutes had aged him. I feel ashamed, he muttered. Ashamed I didn't know my own daughter. I didn't answer. I just sat there, hands folded, letting the silence stretch. Mark cleared his throat, eyes locked on the tabletop. I always thought you needed help, not that you could give it. That's exactly the problem, I said. You all assumed I needed saving. Ryan looked like he wanted to disappear. He kept shifting in his seat like it physically hurt to sit still. I leaned forward. You remember that Christmas? When I showed you one of the dashboard layouts I'd been working on? Mark glanced at me. Not really. You said, and I quote, "No one's going to pay you to make cartoons." Ryan gave a weak laugh. Wasn't that the same year I told you designing logos was for hobbyists? I stared at him. Yeah, that year his smile died fast. Carly was quiet for a second, then suddenly her voice cracked. We weren't trying to be cruel, She blinked, eyes welling. We thought we were looking out for you. I didn't soften. You weren't. You were looking down on me. Big difference. Mom reached across the table, her fingers twitching like she wanted to grab my hand but wasn't sure if she was allowed. Why didn't you say something? No one ever asked what I was building. You just made peace with your version of me and called it love. She looked down, ashamed. So did Stacy. Even the kids had stopped with their phones, like they knew the grown-ups were dealing with something bigger than usual. I came home because I wanted to be Jenna, I said. Not Greenbite, not Forbes, not some article. Just your daughter. Your sister? Dad rubbed his eyes. I want to understand. It'll take time, I said. This isn't a light switch. You don't get to suddenly flip and say you get me now. I know, he said quietly. Tyler leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Would you ever talk to me about what you built? Like the AI stuff, the farming systems? Definitely, I said. That's kind of the point. He smiled, looking proud for the first time since the cookout started. Then his little brother, Josh, maybe 8, piped up from the steps of the deck. Are you going to be at the big building they're making? The research center? I asked. He nodded, mouth stained with popsicle. Yeah, I'll be there. Will there be tractors? I smirked. Real ones and digital ones. He grinned and nodded like that sealed the deal. Carly wiped her eyes and let out a shaky breath. I guess we owe you an apology. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything except honesty moving forward. If you want to know me now, great. If you want to keep pretending I'm something simpler, don't bother. Ryan looked me dead in the eye. I don't want to pretend. Not anymore. Then show up, Mark gave a small nod. I can do that. Mom finally reached out and grabbed my hand. Her voice was small. I'm sorry, I really didn't know, but I want to. I didn't pull away. Okay. Tyler pulled out his phone again, scrolling. I'm going to read every article I can find. This stuff's way cooler than whatever I've been learning in econ. Dad let out a dry laugh. Maybe I should read them too? Maybe, I said. No one moved to clear the table. No one reached for phones. It was like the gravity had shifted and everyone could finally feel it. Josh nudged Tyler. Are we still having dessert? Yeah, I said, standing. We are. The deck went quiet again, just the hum of cicadas and a boat somewhere out on the lake. Everyone sat there like they weren't sure if the world was still spinning or if they were supposed to act normal now. I looked around, then finally said, Let's finish dinner. Then maybe we try this again, from the beginning. Ryan gave me a questioning look. What do you mean? I mean, you get to know the real me, not the version you made up, and I get to see what you're like when you're not trying to fix my life. Dad let out a dry chuckle and nodded slowly. Fair enough. We'll try. Mom didn't speak. She just nodded, lips pressed tight, eyes soft and tired. I walked over to the grill and grabbed the tongs, flipping what was left of the sausages. The heat hit my face, but it was the first kind of warmth all day that didn't sting. Ryan stepped beside me. You still think the will's unfair? No, I said. It makes sense. You and Mark know the farm. You've earned it. He looked at me like I'd just pulled a ripcord on all his guilt. You sure? I don't want the farm. I never did. And I don't need it. Mark leaned out the sliding door with a bowl of fruit salad. So what do you want? I turned, handed Ryan the tongs, and said, to be treated like an equal, like someone who made her own way. Mark nodded. Yeah, we can do that. Carly came out with plates and napkins, eyes a little red, but she gave me a small smile. Stacy followed with a tray of brownies. We laid everything out again like it was just another summer evening. The kids grabbed forks and sat on the deck steps. Tyler sat cross-legged on the ground with his phone. Okay, so this article says your predictive routing system cuts delivery time by 12%. 14 after the last update, I said. His eyes lit up. That's wild. How does it even work? I sat down next to him. It monitors everything. Weather, traffic, fuel pricing, soil moisture. Adjust the route in real time. Josh piped up between brownie bites. Do the robots drive the tractors too? Not yet, I said. But we've got partners working on automation. Might not be long. Dad brought his chair closer. You think all farms are going this direction? Not all, I said. But the smart ones will. The ones that adapt. Mom sat beside him, listening more than speaking. Stacy leaned in. You ever think about doing a talk or a TED thing? I laughed. I get asked. I say no. Why? I like building more than talking. But I'll talk to you guys. That's different. Ryan grabbed a brownie. So how'd you even start? Like, how'd this whole thing begin? Tyler answered before I could. She built the prototype in a one-bedroom rental with no funding. That's right, I said. Laptop on a folding table next to the sink. Heat barely worked. Mark whistled low. And we were over here thinking you needed a job at the county co-op. Yeah, I said, smirking. That would have been a waste. Everyone laughed, and for the first time that day, it felt real. The conversation kept going. Questions, curiosity, actual interest. Not the kind people fake to be polite, but the kind where they wanted to know, where they finally realized I'd built something that mattered, not just to me, but to them. Tyler scrolled again. I'm making a list. Every article, every podcast, gonna learn everything. I nudged him. Start with the AgTech Digest one. That's the real meat. He grinned and nodded. Carly handed me a slice of pie. You good with lemon? Always. I took a bite, and for once, nobody was looking at me like I didn't belong at the table. The sky was dark by the time I pulled away from the lake house, windows down, hair still sticky with the breeze and grill smoke. The road was quiet, just the hum of tires and the occasional bug smacking the windshield. I didn't turn on music. I didn't need it. Halfway home, my phone buzzed in the console cup holder. I glanced down at the preview. Tessa, UN contract signed and processed. All green. Congrats, boss. I smiled and typed back a single emoji, the smiling one with the little sweat drop, and followed it with, I'll review the climate models in the morning. That was enough for tonight. 15 minutes later, I turned onto my street in Eastbridge. Porch lights blinked on here and there. Sprinklers ticked across dry grass. I slowed as I reached my place, a modest one-story with gray siding, white trim, and a garden I'd planted myself 2 summers ago. I'd gutted the inside when I bought it, rewired, retiled, refinished. Every inch of it was mine. I pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, and sat for a second. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, just still. I grabbed my bag and headed inside. The house smelled like cedar and clean air, my kind of quiet. I locked the door behind me, kicked off my shoes, and walked down the short hallway. That's when I passed the frame on the wall, the old wired cover from 3 years ago. It was a black and white photo of me in a blazer I hated, standing in front of a whiteboard covered in sketches and data lines. The headline read, "The Woman Mapping Tomorrow's Harvest." Back then, I didn't even have a real office. I paused, hand brushing the frame. "Still just Jenna," I whispered, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.